Okay, welcome back. Play some music. Cool. Exciting news. I'm not talking about holograms this episode, and at least directly. I mean, certainly will come up, I imagine, in some regard, but like that's not gonna be. I'm not just looking at holograms. I finally looked at the Earth again. It's been like maybe a month. It's been a while since I really did any videos but holograms. So let's get to it. I got some new things to share. Also, I saw this. I kept this open because I saw this the other day. I was like, what in the... It's called a spider-tailed horned viper. So it's a snake, but it's got a spider tail. Incredible. It's things like this that, like, what I envision is someone, literally, like an individual, like almost like in a computer game, like designing an asset or like some kind of component to the game. Like snakes are a thing, and then like many people design snakes and implement them into the game of Earth, of reality, and with ones like this, it just gives me that impression on such a grand scale. It's like, dude, it looks like a spider. Like, what? That's incredible. Incredible. Okay, anyway. Also, this happened. NGC 1277 is dark matter deficient. It's recently published. So before I start talking about Australia, that's just quickly, according to the lambda cold dark matter cosmology, present day galaxies with this stellar mass should contain a sizable fraction of dark matter within their stellar body. Models indicate that in massive early type galaxies with approximately this mass, dark matter should account for 15% approximately of the dynamic mass within one effective radius, blah, 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 blah. Let's get the best relic galaxy candidate discovered to date is NGC 1277 in the Perseus cluster. We used Deep Integral Field George and Cynthia Mitchell spectrograph. It's even acronym that data to revisit this galaxy out to an unprecedented radius by using Jean and isotropic modeling. We find a negligible dark matter fraction, basically, which is in tension with the lambda cold dark matter expectation. So like, it is believed that galaxies form by dark matter, basically forcing them into being. Like, it's an integral component of how galaxies form, according to interpretation. Whether or not it's even a real thing is still a debate, but let's say, like, in the hologram sense, that it is like to, like, here's a galaxy, but then it doesn't have a dark matter halo, whereas, like, this galaxy does. Here's the galaxy dark matter halo. So it's possible, like, holograms are found where they're just like this, just like the disk, without the dark matter, literally. I mean, it's dark and it's matter around it. So, I mean, usually they're found with it around it. So, like, it kind of fits holograms that there would be instances where there's no dark matter. So, if there is such a thing as dark matter, again, it like ties into holograms highly, probably. Like, if there is, then it ties into shallograms in that way. But if there's not, which I've provided already an alternative potential, at least for the galaxy rotation curves, all I haven't like calculated out is almost need like it almost is like, well, it points to certain like variables that can be deduced rather than just like calculating it out to like match the data and like fine tune the variables and in like a, it's hard to explain. Let's move on. And just basically the hidden radius, because of my if dark matter doesn't exist, is because black holes hide a radius, literally. Like when we look at them, we just see a distance, and there's like a black hole at the center of this distance that occupies basically zero distance. But the reality is that it occupies a lot more distance, so it's a hidden distance. But when we look at it, we don't see that distance, which is possible. I feel that's quite possibly what's going on with the galaxy rotation curve. So maybe dark matter is not a thing, but the more I look at it, the more I'm like, well, there is pretty persuasive nuance at least around it, and I can see how it would like play into the things I've discovered the ego on this guy. Facts, bro. Okay, so anyway, let's get past those things and into these X posts. I really don't like this. It looks kind of like, especially up here, it looks kind of silly. Like I can't visually recognize it yet. It takes me a moment to be like, where's the tab? Is that tab there? Anyway, not to talk about things of that nature. Reading about Central Australia orogenies. And I read this paper, which is this one, by the thesis by David Silva in Sydney, 2019 June, about basically what I was looking at was orogenies, specifically the Alice Springs orogeny is what ASO is what I looked for and found a paper about it. And I was just looking at it, and I just thought I should share this stuff because it's pretty informative. The last thing I was talking about was Australia, so I figured if I picked up again on the Earth, I should pick up where I was. Like, we talked about the Himalayas a long time ago. We talked about North America, and then at some point we moved over into the Himalayas and Damodar Kun, which brought us over into Greece and Europe and other places we talked about in general. But in terms of like mapping currents, I've mapped currents in North America extensively. I've mapped currents across here pretty significantly, I would say, that were flowing atop the surface, as well as mapping the whole globe in terms of below the surface currents that were present based on this map. Like going in the blue regions, the current flow. I've mapped all that. But what I haven't mapped is the entire Earth's surface in the same way as I did North America, which I did over here somewhat and over here. But at some point it brought me over in my last video to looking at this region, and I noticed, well, there's this thing here, which kind of suggests a current flow this way, and then running into resistance and going up this way, and just forming a general eddy here. Is what I was talking about in my last video about Australian flows or something. I think it was called like 15, 20 videos ago, because I've just been talking about shallograms. I even got more shallograms. I was like, do I make another one about shallograms first? Let's finish these. I'll keep them. I also got a whole tab of tabs of trilobites. Just trilobites off Etsy that I was thinking about going into looking at them in sort of an introductory way. I'm certainly no expert on the range of trilobites out there, But in terms of looking for anomalies and things that point to a process rather than an actual living creature, in the same way that ammonites I've demonstrated were not living creatures and like are on the scale of Australia right here, for instance, and etc. Like also over here, like up here, starting here, going around this way into there, and then over here, one there in the Colorado Plateau. Like they're all over the place because they're not living creatures. They never were living creatures. They're results of geological processes from the Earth expansion time of Earth's history, which is no longer actively occurring because the Earth has stabilized. A new ocean floor formed, the continents broke apart, they separated by a new ocean floor forming the space between, and then the water that was flowing atop the surface and all these currents I've mapped no longer was. It drained into the newly formed ocean beds and the Earth stabilized, and here we are pretty much, with some nuance where like the process still happened. Like the Sahara dried out. Like initially it wasn't dried out and there was water there, things were green, but then like reality set in as this huge area with no source of water to it really, and it's along the equator. Like water's just not getting to it and it's just dried out. I'm not sure, like maybe over here has enough water getting to it to like not have had this happen to it. I'm not exactly sure why it became just desert. Also because the sand from the water flows this way. I talk about it all the way back in my Ancient Dwarka, The Secrets of Mount Gurnar video. Secrets of Mount Gurnar video, which is certainly flawed in many ways, but it points to things of relevance. One being that there is a flow that like separates out the sandy particles more over here and puts more like nutrients over here and in these areas kind of thing. I think there might be something of that nature going on, but it's hard to say without really even knowing how to look into it really and having the motivation to. I'm looking at so many things. It's like you gotta choose something to look at any given moment. And anyway, so let's get to Australia. So last time we looked at it, we were talking about this current here flowing this way, generally speaking, producing even like this thing here, this ammonite shape here, that even if we zoom in has like a center region here that like spirals out to a further boundary and then spirals out and then adds like almost like a endless finger. It kind of looks like this shallogram here, this one. Like having actual like knuckles, like this part, the way it has these like folds, it kind of makes me think of like an actual finger. This one looks like a finger initially that wraps around and then over here becomes more traditionally ammonite looking. But over here it's got this matrix that's still like there and hasn't been shaped the same way because it's flowing underneath this to a degree, probably. I'm not sure exactly why it would do this, but in essence, it's kind of doing that here out to like this boundary ultimately, and then even probably extending over into that and all sorts of stuff. And I'm not sure if I can easily find the things that are not easy to find. I can find this thing, which I talked about in that Australia Flows episode, and how it generally looks to spiral in. I hope my mouse is okay. I lost the monitor like 3 days ago. My other monitor it wouldn't turn on today. I was like, oh my god. I had to like, I don't know, try many things and then got lucky that it turned on. Then it's got this thing over here, but anyway. If my mouse goes again, like the first Earth, on the first underground science videos, like first 100, 150, I got this mouse that's just like, every time I try to scroll out, it's doing like this. It's like, oh my god, dude. Okay, I haven't said really anything relevant yet, except for just kind of talking, so let's get to it. So this paper, Alice Springs orogeny required episodic melts which require a fertile source of melt and are argued to have required external force. Word required, while it's like repetitive, has a meaning. Like, based on the evidence, this couldn't happen without these things, is basically what that word means. So let's check this out. Ubiquitous evidence of the former melt presence within the something shear zone. I think it was like Gog. It almost was like goddamn, but it was like Gog dam, like DAM. Gog dam shear zone focuses attention on the origin of the melt, the anhydrous and infertile nature of the granulite facies basement rocks that host the shear zone. I don't know what all these, like, I don't know what everything means. I didn't read the totality of the paper either, admittedly. However, it doesn't like mean that what I'm pointing to is not comprehended sufficiently for me to be pointing to it and like having a basis and not just talking out of my ass. Okay. Host, the shear zone is inconsistent with local derivation of melt and markedly contrasts with the hydrous character of the deformed rocks. Abundant biotite growth during shearing and a lack of partial melting textures. For example, paratectic minerals surrounded by leucosome and reaction consumption of hydrous phases. Lack of partial melting textures further argues, and the abundant biotite growth during shearing further argues against in situ melting of the host rocks during the Alice Springs orogeny. These relationships suggest that melt was externally derived, implying melt flux through the shear zone during deformation. So this external element here, these relationships suggest this external element, and then here's a map. So this is what we're looking at. It's basically, here's all of Australia in this one, and then figured 1B is this larger rectangle, and then 1C is the smaller rectangle. So we're kind of moving in towards generally the center. I believe it's like, let's see if we can find it on, if I just type it, Alice Springs. It's probably just hit this, I guess. It's got to be around here then, if that is called that. Like this. My mouse is definitely doing that. Fuck. Everything is going wrong, and everything. Just like first world problems. Not even first world problems. Like first world. Like fucking. What are you doing? What is this man doing? This boy, this child, man, child. Okay, so we're looking generally here though. So Alice Spring, and then this granite going that way. I cannot quite tell where it is. I don't see any degrees to kind of help us out here. Oh, maybe down here. Gog Dam Shear Zone. Gold Star. Okay, so that one's 23.147 south. So 23.147. Yeah, so somewhere around here. And then probably 130, let's see, 134. 134, yeah, so we're probably around here. We're pretty close. It's gotta be this. So this is the Alice Springs orogeny right here, which is part of this eye. The bottom of the eye is what we're looking at, which is pretty relevant. There's this other eye over here. We've talked, these are Odin's eyes. I talk about this in Odin related episodes and other things. So to place a orogeny along them is pretty useful that we're finding some data on it. Okay, so orogenic episodicity, dynamic feedback between far-field stresses, melt availability, and rheological weakening. The intracontinental, so like in the middle, I believe, is intracontinental, within, yeah. Setting of the Alice Springs orogeny suggests, so like it's not at the plate boundary, even though plate tectonics is false and the Earth expanded. It's interpreted through the lens of plate tectonics, and plate tectonics says when plates collide at their boundaries by the Wilson cycle, like a collision separates, collision separates. I don't know what's going on with the Wilson cycle. No offense, Jay Tuzo. I see you there. He's got a nice little smile. But the Wilson cycle, it ain't so. And it really runs into like, how did this mountain chain? How is this happening when there's a mountain chain in the middle of the so-called plate of Australian plate, including whatever exactly the plate is, probably down here even. Like it's in the middle. It's not, nothing's colliding with it there. So why is it there? Basically. Okay. So, suggests that orogenesis involved a localized weak zone within otherwise strong lithosphere. So basically some kind of like weak point that allowed for an upwelling. Like they're like, what? Well, it must be something where like there's a weak point there and an upwelling, like, because how else did it get there? It wasn't from the Wilson cycle. Clearly, it's not from the Wilson cycle, so it can't be that. So it must be some kind of upwelling, and for other reasons, probably, I don't know, like the full extent of why they would come to that conclusion, or any other mountain chains that involve that analysis. I don't know of any other mountain chains that are like, there was a weak point in the crust and then the mountain chain came up through it and there it was, and that's how the mountain chain formed. I don't know anywhere else that someone even proposes that, so it's a little strange to me. Then again, it probably exists elsewhere. If someone knows of any other mountain chains that is the current interpretation of how they formed under plate tectonics, I would be curious to hear. But It's all, as far as I know, like the one of the anomalies of the Rockies is that they're not at the edge of the continent. And so it becomes a little confusing, and the like collision of the plate boundary becomes like, well, what do we do here? And then there's all sorts of like theories around it. But this is just right at smack dab at the middle of the continent. It's not even like off center, off to the side, just like staggered off the edge. Like it's at least the Rockies are like parallel ish to the edge of the continent. They're like kind of going up this way. This whole mountain, all these mountains, even down here, are just generally like going at a distance from the edge that's generally constant-ish enough to be like maybe related, even though there's clearly like a lot of nuance that pretty much demonstrates that's not the case. It is not how mountains form, and that's that kind of thing. But like, it's still, plate tectonics holds on strong and demands it being like the lens through which data is now analyzed, and things like this just become very hard to explain through that lens. Okay. So recent work shows that the failed Larapinta rift, let's check that out. Larapinta rift images, map. Not sure. I mean, it must be in the actual paper. Oh, no, no. Figure 3, it said. Okay, this one. Larapinta was pretty much like it, I guess, in the same place as the Alice Springs orogeny, because otherwise, why would it matter that that one was at this point and then the Alice Springs orogeny was afterwards? So it's probably closely related. Deep epicratonic Larapinta rift. North-south extensional activity formed the deep epicratonic Larapinta rift. Now notice north-south extensional activity. So there's this north-south element to what's going on in Australia that these papers are like, dude, we got a problem. Like, these models don't explain this. Word. Let's keep going because I'm so slow right now. I'm sorry, guys. But recent work showed that the failed rift, together with its thick sedimentary fill, represents the required weak zone. So it's just like, well, there was this failed rift, and then it provided a pathway for like this upwelling of melts to produce this mountain chain. And additionally, global scale plate reorganization drove rift inversion and strain localization. So what they're saying really is, so because this rift is there, and then it's got this thick sedimentary fill, it allows for a weak zone, and then that weak zone just kind of there, and then plate global scale, mind you, plate reorganization, which assumes plate tectonics. But if we were to say global scale Earth expansion processes, it makes much more sense. Like, the Earth expansion process was on a global scale, so it was global processes scale-wise really driving how this mountain chain had any like mechanism to form. Where plate tectonics, like, I mean, they pretty much gotta cause like the boundary of the plate to be stressed in some way, which then induces some sort of propagation of the energy to the center where this weak point is, and then it upwells at the center. I'm not sure why it would be like at the center. This episodic nature, okay, while the importance of fault reactivation in controlling deformation patterns has been widely recognized, the episodic nature of the Alice Springs orogeny suggests another factor must play a role. If orogenesis was enabled solely by reactivation of pre-existing faults, strain localization at rheological interfaces, let's look that up exactly. At deformation interfaces, okay. Okay, so that's deformation based. Strain localization at deformation interfaces, or the presence of weak rift-filled sediments, then continuous deformation may be expected. So if there was only reactivation of the pre-existing faults, then continuous deformation may be expected. In contrast, magmatic systems are inherently episodic due to the link between melt pressure buildup, release, and melt extraction. So they're basically like, how do we explain the episodic nature of this? We can't just say there's this weak point that then upwelled just by this by reactivation of a pre-existing fault. It, in that instance, it would just upwell and done. Like the pressure would push, things would push, it would upwell, and then it would stop. But in contrast, magmatic systems have build-up phases where the magma flows in and pressure builds, and then it breaks through some seal and releases the pressure, and then there's not pressure inside because it vented. But then that lack of pressure allows the seal to reform pretty much, and then the pressure builds again, at which point it releases and episodically goes through cycles. So they're pretty much like, this episodic nature points to a very almost necessary element of there being this melt pressure buildup, that there is this aspect of it that is not just like a boop. Okay, then there's this. Let's keep going. Just in general, here are the episodes. The DS is, let's see, Gaussian summation probability density distribution plots is this figure of origin-wide age data for synorogenic sedimentation S, deformation metamorphism D, so like deposition of sediment, I guess, and then deformation and metamorphism being D, and then igneous activity IG. So these things, I guess, are all happening at generally different times, but also generally overlapping times. Like the red is not the same as the blue here. It kind of peaks at 446, and then the blue peaks at 415 again, and then, which is the deformation metamorphism at 446, 415, 377, 360, 334, and then 318. It peaks at all those, where the igneous peaks at these times, and then the Syn orogenic sedimentation, I guess, goes on during these windows, which it doesn't label exactly, but generally those times. And I mean, it certainly relates. Like, this is all one process. It's not like the orogeny was just decided to happen because this weak point was there. Like, this is one process. Like, this was coming up. And so the pressure of the Alice Springs orogeny, like, being forced to the surface, involved a step in the process of this rift forming. It seems, just based on like the fact that this igneous thing like goes back into the rift time frame and just kind of continues vibratorily across this way. Okay, let's keep going though. So that's that paper, and then also that same paper. We argue that in the deep crust, recently deposited sediments underwent prograde metamorphism to produce melt over a sustained period, but that melt migration and associated deformation was only facilitated when an external force was applied, which they say due to plate reorganization, which is really the Earth's expansion process, and outside systems and interacting because the Earth was expanding and things were going on with high pressures where outside systems were interacting across boundaries. And especially Australia, everything was just being focused there, which is why this ammonite system is even here in the first place, because there were currents coming together and compacting basically a disk that then got shaped into an ammonite by a current getting into that system and flowing within it, which then flowed out over here. So like, notice this thing, and by the way, this is where we're looking at pretty much. Let's see. Sorry if I get too close to my freaking mic sometimes. Okay. Let's just say 34 point, or 23.6 south, and then 134-ish. 23, what was it, 23? That's 23. 23.4. So I guess it's here. That's real interesting. Let me pull up animations. This is probably useful right now. Yeah, there it is. I'm not sure if I did it exactly right, but wow. When I look at this, I really think that it's this here. I really look at it and just kind of think it's this. But I gotta remember it's like staggered down there, I guess. So this is really like the top of this. So there's a current going in this way that basically had like a chamber formed by the pressure, and it got in, flowed in this way, and just started to excavate the material and flow out this way, out over here. So it took all this material, which possibly is melt related, like this stuff coming through from an outside source. Maybe it actually is going like this, and over here, and then over out this way. But because it reaches this funnel point, it like ran into this mound it was forming and went like up along this region, maybe this mound even, and just created like a wall in front of it, basically compacted a region, which then went caused like a actual severing up into the crust, because this is below the crust, like in the down below in the deeper layer, in the deeper part of the crust, not at the surface level, that this current is flowing, and then it like is doing these things under the crust, like down in the layers, going with a lid on top of it, so it's like goes in this channel, does all this, and goes out this channel, probably out this channel over here, but like because it's forced down this narrow channel, whatever is not escaping, like over here and over here, that does go this way, seems to have played a role, substantial role. I mean, for sure it was from this stuff, just because it's right there where this mountain chain is. Seems to have played a significant role. So an external force was applied due to plate reorganization. So what really was happening is around this time frame, this ammonite was forming under the crust, starting to take shape, and then it upwelled here through the Alice Springs orogeny, created it. Okay. Melt pressure was sufficiently high to overcome yield stress. Let's go back a little bit. Migration, association, deformation was only facilitated when external force was applied due to some reason. I mean, they say due to plate reorganization, but due to something. I mean, it doesn't really matter what the like reasoning in placed here is. Like, what matters is that it be explained. Like, how something did it. What did it? Obviously, the correct answer is preferable. So, Earth's expansion process, not plate tectonics processes, which aren't real because plate tectonics is false. Associated with continuous and external stresses. I mean, like, it really is experiencing that. Australia was having current flows literally coming over this way that ran into resistance here. A current flow coming this way under Australia here that ran into that current. And then another one over here that was just holding this container in place and formed a shell. And just flow and flow was coming. So, like continuous external stresses fits. B, melt pressure was sufficiently high to overcome yield stresses. During melt release, deformation was highly localized and melt present. Highly localized deformation, almost like it specifically came out into the Alice Springs orogeny, like because it was ramping resistance and just going up. Like current flowing, running into a resistance, but having so much pressure behind it that it just goes up and out, I guess. Let's see. Let's look at this a little bit. Even forming literally layered like this way, maybe. Injecting layers that went forward, went up, forward, and like layered on top of it, and just kept layering and layering to a thickness that it filled the space that it was cut, etching. I mean, maybe. Not sure. Not sure if, I guess over here too then. The current comes in this way and kind of runs into this region. In terms of like what's going on here. Up here. I don't know exactly where these things are, and I don't really feel like pinpointing them. That's right, that's right, that's right. We got this. This is so nice. So if we look at this is what we're looking at. Here is where that stuff is. It's pretty much the heart, like the center of the nucleus here is actually like right there. This region is like right there. 24, 132. Yeah, pretty much right there. So maybe it's like flowing in and like running into resistance here and upwelling generally in a way that it produced like this region especially. Then there's this from one side, this from the other side. Like this way and then this way. Going around here, entering this chamber space through here and going up there. So maybe. I don't even know what this is. I don't know exactly. There's so much. This is why I was just like, oh my god. I'm so tired. I've made so many discoveries and no one cares. I mean, people care. I appreciate it. Thanks, guys. It's just like, dude, how am I not getting paid for this yet? Dear God, the world doesn't even care. I mean, luckily, it's gotta be that this is all some other thing than it's just like the world that's made out to be. You're all in on it. That's the only explanation. See, this is literally the only explanation for why my research hasn't picked up by now. Cause this shit is bomb. I know maybe this episode is not like the most like captivating, but holy shit, the discoveries I made. Pfft. I mean, if it's just me making discoveries in the world that like I grew up in and I died, like. You guys are like, no, that was legitimately our experience, was that we lived our lives too. And we had no fucking clue what was going on there. It's like, dude, how is this not picked up yet? Is it just so immense? People don't know what to do except deny it. Anyway. Upon melt source drainage. During melt release, deformation was highly localized, facilitating fault reactivation through deformation, rheological weakening through deformation. Upon melt source drainage, steep shear zones became strong and deformation ceased. Allowing melt pressure to gradually build up again. Conceptually, this is similar to the fluid deformation cycles envisaged by the fault valve concept. Once melt pressure was sufficiently high, shear zones became active again, initiating another episode of simultaneous igneous and tectonic activity. By this mechanism, repeated episodes of melt-present deformation and melt-induced reactions softening drove substantial weakening, and thus melt availability played a critical role in enabling intracontinental orogenesis. Melt availability, like some of the times it was evacuated. It's almost because essentially what's going on inside of this is it's a particle, like a fractal particle, literally, like an atom, a fractal atom. that then had a current flow into it and shape it out and cause like decay sequence, I guess. I mean, that's my interpretation that I've talked about in the past. And so maybe it does like a region here as much as it can, and like at some point it's able to just evacuate the pressure within through like a channel this way, which then did so episodically, where it got like chunks of this region just out and stripped from below the upper crust, so that it was more just melt material. I guess melted this. Also, it's flowing from over here, mind you. This flow over here, when the flow goes under North America, initially the flow goes from the mantle puncture hole this way and flows very smoothly, so it's probably hot, basically. It's probably hot, flowing this way. And then it runs into North America, which is actually where it ran into the ancient ocean that was sat atop North America, at least part of it, especially Canada, and existed on the pre-expansion Earth. And so when this magma reached this crust that had a ocean on top, it heat exchanged, and that cooled the magma over here and caused it to solidify and become more like this, which then basically built a wall so the current couldn't get in as easily, so it ended up going around it until it finally flowed down the east coast of North America and just severed North America from Africa and flowed this way, and also like boiled the water flowing off of North America that was flowing this way, and like literally boiled it and caused salt deposits here. It kept flowing, and then it flowed from here over into here. Like right here, all this didn't exist yet. The Eastern Pacific didn't exist. It flowed right into here, and then down this way, where it was flowing into here. So it was like providing a magma, an undercurrent that had yet to heat exchange. So it was probably more molten than had it gone under North America to get here, but because when it went under North America, it solidified and made a wall, and then it went around it. Then what got to Australia from North America just didn't heat exchange as much and was more just hot, and probably made this more melt-like, I'm thinking, and etched through it and allowed for it to shape, as well as this one over here. I'm not sure if this one would be... Oh my god. I've had heat exchange when it goes down this way, generally. It probably heat exchanged somewhat, at least. And then went this way, down through Antarctica, across here. And then up this way. And then under and into here in part. Also bouncing off over this way, going over and interacting with that current and going down here, participating in this, all sorts of things. Let's keep going with the actual papers. Okay, upon melt source drainage, okay, we read that. Once melt pressure was sufficiently high, shear zones became active again, initiating another episode. Okay. And then another paper. This one says, and I quote, "The cause of the Alice Springs orogeny is unclear, as summarized by Coney et al. 1990, but still it's pretty fair. It obviously records a massive intraplate failure of the Australian craton. In a broad sense, the Alice Springs orogeny is coeval, simultaneous, with the mid-Carboniferous Caniblin late compressive events in the Lachlan. Let's look at that. I didn't look that up. Caniblin. I don't know if I spelled that right at all. Caniblin. Lachlan. Eastern. Toward the end of early Carboniferous, about 318 million years ago, according to Wikipedia, which is frequently not true, but that's okay. Formed 450 to 340, this one. East part of Australia. Let's look at this. Lachlan orogeny, I guess, is down here, this region. So simultaneous to this, which notice this, and then here is actually like where this is. But also this over here is like where this New England orogeny is. Tasmanides. I guess that goes towards Alice Spring. I'm not sure. So it's simultaneous with the Caniblin late compressive events in the Lachlan. To date, no plate tectonic explanation for the Alice Springs orogeny has been recognized. Let's see what Alice Springs orogeny. Let's just see. What? Because that was 1990. Crustal block dominate. Actually, let's go to this paper real quick. The paper quoting this is from 2013. So even 2013, there's no real, like, it's pointed out this in the paper. So here, this is where I started to like get interested in this. Was, if you notice over here, like, I didn't mean to talk about this when I was talking about this structure in my Australian flows episode. I just was looking at it. I didn't know what to make of it exactly, but if you look here, like this over this way, just by the shape of it, and then this to kind of get an eye over this way, and then this. So it's like right there. So involved in this is this current flow I was talking about, which really is exciting. Like when the things connect like that, and that really points to, okay, well, that was a current flow, so that was a current flow. Looks like this current went this way in the Devonian, and then in the Carboniferous it was more lifted, like the flow from Antarctica that was coming across this way pushed against it more, where down it was initially flowing like the boundary. Even this arrow kind of looks like the one from North America. The flow from North America and the flow from Antarctica are kind of opposing one another here and have a balance point. And I guess initially North American flow was over pushing the balance over here, but then the flow from Antarctica began to push further and further, which at some point led to the Solomon Islands like coming out from over here when it was actually over here. And let's see, like this, the flow was coming up here, and it then opened this up and pushed this out, like started to push stuff away from Australia based on the way that this opened, rather than it like doing it over here. Like this stayed closed. This was adjacent to here. Papua New Guinea. This, if we just, maybe I'll just go to this one, was like this. Broken bonds. Like there's literally broken bonds. So here's Solomon Islands. We're down here. Like, and the bond broke. But it did so by an actual current flow overwhelming the other current coming this way and just overwhelming it and pushing out. And that like spaced the Solomon Islands out, but then it caused that current to bend over this way. Possibly go up this way and maybe even go like that. And feed over this way, like it essentially push the boundaries out. So this map kind of, I would say, like, let's make sure I'm getting these sequentially correct. Devonian is 420 to 359. From the end of the Devonian, yeah, so afterwards. Next 60 million was the Carboniferous. So, how's this going anyway? I'm an hour in. Oh my god, guys. What have I even said? So this flow, though, pushes this boundary, I guess, is perhaps something going on here. Now this is what I thought really interesting. In this same region, across this way, where I said there is a flow coming in here. I mean, it looks like it might actually be here. Let's look at it. I didn't really pinpoint it. It's called the Larapentine Seaway, which I guess extended over here even. I'm not sure based on just the outline. I'm not... So there's a seaway that existed. There's a cross section of it, I guess. It's kind of... And then a Centralian super basin, so really deep basin here, I guess. And then a seaway that went across the basin. I'm not sure. Let's check it out here, though. So, like, there's that thing. It probably starts right there. Goes over, narrows a bit here. Goes over this way, narrows. Through here, goes that way, I guess. Cross here, just went across here. In a detectable way at that time. So there's definitely something of that nature at play, where there was a seaway, so that's pretty cool. Although it's not here, it's not here. So this might actually have been an undercurrent related in a similar way over here, how it's got like these these features that are almost like upwelling, maybe so is this, driven by upwelling. That didn't form quite as spiky, but more just like a color bands across here. I don't know. I mean, it certainly has the spiky, if so, stuff going on here too. So maybe that was going on though. Where is undercurrent here? Although this to me is highly throughout. Like it's something coming in here too, I'd imagine, like water. That was especially flowing in there, and some current going this way. I guess though, went in here based on in this little shape, this nook, unless it went out that way. I just assumed it was traveling west to east. Anyway, so there's that. I don't know. That's all I know about it. Let's continue. Central Australian Heat Province. So I looked for other things. I was like, Heat Province? What the? I've never heard the term Heat Province before. Weird. So I looked around. And pretty unique heat flux in Australia. I found this article that showed the heat flux, heat flow, where there's like distinctly lower over here generally. I mean, I don't know how precise this is. I was reading they were like some of the measurements are like hundreds of kilometers apart. We recently updated it, but I don't know how good it is yet. I don't know. I think this is the best we got as far as I could find that show though some heat flux where it's like way hotter over here, way hotter, way cooler, cool, hot, almost like it's calmed wherever here. Like if we just look at this, like it's literally got an opening. Like it's exchanging freely with anything it can because it doesn't have a wall. So it kind of would make sense that there would be a high heat flux to the crust here where we would see more heat exchange through the crusts in this region. I don't know why it doesn't like exactly mimic the shape. I mean, it somewhat has similarities, but it's not identical. It's very similar, I guess, having that. Also goes over into there pretty well. This area, even, I found another one. This paper. More maps from this paper. So I found this paper. These are estimated crustal temperature at 5 kilometers derived from database. So temperature C at 5 kilometers. Much hotter here, very hot here. This though, if we look at this, check, interesting, I didn't even notice this part. It's like the center of this ammonite, it's like its nucleus is hot. Is it like right here? Here's this edge where this goes this way. It's not exactly, it would be more, the more centered would be like here, but it's pretty close. It's almost like it stores heat well there in the nucleus region. Maybe because it's the nucleus region where like maybe the current's etched out more in a way, like a bowl kind of way, although ammonites aren't really bowl-like. Although maybe. Maybe there's something of that nature to it as well, where it just like has a container to the ammonite that encourages flows back to over here. Like anything that gets in here maybe flows around now, even though it was flowing out. At this point, though, like it's kind of hard for flow to get in, maybe. So anything that flows in can like flow to the end over here and accumulate there or something. I don't know. Just a thought based on that heat map. Then there's this highly South Australian heat flow anomaly in this region. This was based on like geothermal energy, so that's kind of what the paper is focused on. But it just had that map. So down there, it's also hot. Okay, real quick. 2 more things. I got 9 minutes. More from this paper, which is this one. The one that cited that plate tectonics quote. This quote. Although this is uncorrected, so that's why it's really hard to mouse over, because it highlights that too. So more from this one. They said, stress pattern, in my words, I guess, of the Alice Springs orogeny in combination with paleomagnetic data draws into question the eastward open ocean, providing more evidence that it simply did not exist because the Earth expanded and plate tectonics is false. So the actual quote, Australia's Paleozoic tectonic evolution is generally interpreted in a Paleo-Pacific subduction framework. A westward subduction driver, however, does not relate naturally to the north-south stress pattern of the Alice Springs orogeny. Alternative exploration of a southward Tethyan tectonic driver for the Alice Springs orogeny has been held back by prominent presence on Paleozoic global reconstructions of an eastward open ocean between northeastern Gondwana and southeastern Laurasia. So Gondwana, Laurasia. So like this ocean, they're saying, here's Australia, like this big old ocean here. Between them. Implications from recent paleomagnetic data from eastern Australia, however, do question the reality of such an eastward open ocean during early Carboniferous in particular. The new data define a substantial and mainly early Carboniferous northward movement of Australia, northeastern Gondwana, leading to collision with the Central Asian orogenic belt. Such convergence offers a wanting Tethyan drive for the Alice Springs orogeny, and in turn offers a conceptual stepping stone for reinterpreting Australian and Middle-Late Paleozoic tectonics as driven, at least partly, by ASO-related tectonic extrusion. And then, I just quoted this, so. Unconventional leads. Powell recognized the widespread nature of late Paleozoic north-south compressional deformation throughout Australia and attributed intercratonic ASO-related deformation and large-scale mega-kinking throughout the Tasman orogenic system to a common, though undefined, mid-Carboniferous cause. The wide extent and pervasiveness of such deformation are well recognized nowadays, exemplified by recent seismic profiling, evidence for early Carboniferous southward thrusting of the Thompson orogeny origin over the Lachlan origin at the Olipoloko fault zone, and Devonian southward thrusting at the northern Selwyn block. This is, by the way, the uncorrected one, I guess. Also, these have... Anyway, it is what it is. I mean, this emerging picture of Australia-wide north-south compressional deformation, however, is hard to reconcile with the plate tectonic paradigm of westward, head-on, or even highly oblique Paleo-Pacific subduction as the main driver for Paleozoic deformation of the Tasman orogenic system and the Australian craton. Several unconventional, directionally more comfortable tectonics scenarios do invoke Tethyan rather than Pacific drivers, featuring northward convergence and collision of Gondwana with Eurasia or Laurasia. So, like, I don't know if this is resolved. I haven't like researched this thoroughly in terms of like plate tectonics. I don't know if this is like Baja BC, where people are like the Rockies formed this way and this is the model, and like they're slightly critiquing it, and it is just kind of eastward motion collision into Laurasia that led to the Rockies and blah 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 kind of thing, or like other people are like, or like this stuff from way down here, which is crazy because it's true. Material from down here, like I don't know exactly all the details, but Baja BC, Baja California material went to British Columbia BC, called Baja BC theory, or Baja BC is a main element of like a counter model to explain the data, because it's just not, the Rockies are not like as consensus as a lot of other topics because they're not at the edge of the plate, like they're too far from the edge, so then they're confusing and there's all sorts of anomalies that are like, wait a minute, what do we do about this? And that leads to Baja BC, which is not quite true, but it's much closer to the truth. Similarly, there's highly likely that this is just like accepted to be some relationship to like a Pacific driven collision of the plate from the Pacific into Australia that then is induced the Alice Springs orogeny. But these papers are like, no, it didn't, dude. They're like, it can't be that way. It can't be that way. We don't know what it is, but it can't be that way. I don't know if like where the consensus is now. What, like, I have no idea where to. I just gotta start looking at it, I guess. I mean, I just came across this term of Alice. It's not really. I mean, it's legitimately. I discovered the term Alice Springs orogeny, not in like a discovery, like, oh, what a discovery, but in like a just generic like language way. Like I came across Alice Springs orogeny, so like that allows me to have something to like look for a little better. So maybe I can get a better picture. The thing is, like, Baja BC is all over YouTube thanks to Nick Zender. Alice Springs orogeny, I don't think there's much people talking about it like that. Like that's how I came across it, was through YouTube. By I assume Oz Geographics. There's a top secret CIA base there too. I don't know. Okay. Before I play some other music that's gonna get copyright blocked. Alright, dudes and dudettes. Thanks for hanging out. Pardon me, it's a donut. It's a donut. You see, it's a donut. Do you see the donut? Guys? Guys, do you see the donut on my shirt? It's the earth. The earth. It's a donut. Okay?